this is part 2 of our little discussion of the so-called Syrian strike and congressional involvement therein. I have found a reference about it was called the Gulf War. This happened in 1991, not the invasion of Iraq of 2003, but something a bit earlier that had to do with Desert Storm and Saddam taking over Kuwait. So there was a case brought by some congressman, one of whose name was Dellums, and it's called Dellums v. Bush. Have you read Maxwell v. Bush? That went on in the year 2006, and I was the plaintiff. This one, in Dellums, it gets to the point where some congressmen, maybe just a handful, go to court and say, the president is threatening to start a war without asking Congress permission. So, Mr. Judge Harold Green said, the congressional power to declare war does not stand alone, but is accompanied by powers granted to the president. Well, I'll go along with that. Then he says, it is the position of the Department of Justice on behalf of the president that the simultaneous exist. What? The Department of Justice on behalf of the president? Isn't that a third branch? Isn't the judiciary separate from the executive? No, the Department of Justice is, probably should not have that name. I have a little problem with names at times, but it means just the DOJ. And now we know who it is. It's the Attorney General and his office, who do seem to work for the president, though that, you could talk about that too. After all, the Attorney General was first appointed, I think, by Washington, and he had, he would give legal advice to the president, who was really giving it to the nation, I think. But here you have the DOJ sticking up for one of the branches. I think they only stick up for their own branch, as far as I know. Anyway, the judge didn't quite go along with that, because he said that doctrine, he says, on that view, the question of whether an offensive action taken by American armed forces constitutes an act of war to be initiated by a declaration, presumably undertaken by the president in his capacity of commander-in-chief, is not one of objective fact, but involves an exercise of judgment based on all the vagaries of foreign affairs and blah, blah. Indeed, the department, DOJ, contends that there are no judicially discoverable and manageable standards to apply. And then, happily for us, Judge Green went on to say that the court has no hesitation in concluding that an offensive entry into Iraq by several 100,000 U.S. servicemen under conditions described above could be described as a war within the meaning of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution. To put it another way, the court is not prepared to read out of the Constitution the clause granting to Congress and to it alone the authority to declare war. There you go. But as it happens, the case failed on another technicality we won't go into that. But I noticed he said, the plaintiffs in this case do not have a remedy available to them from their fellow legislators. I don't agree. They have the remedy of boxing their ears. They just go around and box each congressman's ears until he or she comes to understand what's written in the Constitution and the fact that he has no choice about being responsible to carry out the Constitution. Now, I read that from a book by Lewis Fisher, which is, what's it called? Constitutional Structures. Love those structures. And here's a picture of dear old George Washington, dear old Benny. They're all wearing their, Benny's not wearing a wig, but everybody else seems to have a powdered wig. And not lederhosen, which would be like tights, I think, but cute hose. And big heavy collars and frilly neck pieces. All of this occurring in a room with no air conditioning in the middle of July in Philadelphia in what was said to be a very hot year. Oh, was it a hot year? 1787. Now, this book, it's called The Founders' Constitution, and it comes in 4 volumes, every one of which is a delight. And it isn't about the Constitution. It's about papers that were being read on the material or the thinking problems that were available to the men who were wearing their clothes on the hot day. For example, they had a letter of 1787. Oh no, sorry, that was November, and by that time they had gone home to their more chilly colonies, ex-colonies. But still, letters were being circulated to help, solidify the Constitution. And here's one by Brutus. I don't know who Brutus is, but you could easily find out from Wikipedia who is Brutus. And it says, and this is in 1787, if then this government should not derive support from the goodwill of the people, it must be executed by force, or not executed at all. Either case would lead to the total destruction of liberty. Oh, I have more to say on that subject. And then we have this guy here saying about, what is war and what is not war. Queen Elizabeth's whole reign may be almost called, not current Queen Elizabeth, a state of defensive and offensive war. In England as well as in Ireland, in the Indies as well as Europe, she ventured to go through this state as if it were a venture, without the help of a standing army, blah, blah, blah. The militia was established by Alfred and fell into decay under the Stuarts. Well, I don't have to worry about that. I don't know who wrote that. The guy's name is James Berg. Writing in 1774. I don't know who he is. But we have good old Madison. Now, always fun to read Madison. This is a letter he wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1898. And he said, the President's message is only a further development to the public of the violent passions and heretical politics which have long been privately known to govern him. It is hoped that the House of Reps will not hastily echo them. I don't know which president it was in 1798. Was it still Washington? I guess it was the Adams. I mean, he wouldn't be talking to Jefferson in the third person, I don't think. Listen to what he says. He's defending the same thing I was defending earlier, and which everybody, of course, should be defending, and which Rand Paul is the champion at the moment. And Lewis Fisher, the scholar that writes that book, is very much the champion. But the doctrines lately advanced strike at the root of all these provisions. This is the Constitution supposes, what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. And then he says that in declaring war, if the President, in the recess of Congress, President, you see, anyone see my YouTube video on the kitchen Constitution? Well, as originally envisioned, there's Congress, and then there's this little sort of thing in there, and that's the man who executes Congressman's wish, and that's called the executive. But now it's called the President, and we tend to want to make him less a king of the President. When people do that, you want to have a king.